I'm going to talk about Judith Butler's essay, Imitation and Gender and Subordination. And the first thing I want to say is that it's written in 1991, which makes it about 30 years old. And some of the stuff that she says in here, we're just going to have to cut her some slack because the essay is older and we might have different words or definitions now than the ones she's using. And I'm going to start not by looking at the essay, but by talking about some of the things that we've gone through already, but I'm going to go through them much more specifically now with my chalkboard. And on my chalkboard, I have 3 columns. The first is for sex. And by sex, we normally mean, and we know this because we've talked about it, the physical attributes that determine whether you're male or female. And the second column is for gender, which we think of as the attributes that one exhibits depending on if you're a man or a woman. Okay, the third column is sexuality, and that has to do with what you are and whom you desire. Okay, so again, we're going just with 2 columns for each because that, can you imagine how fun this was for me to draw? Because that's what she's working with. And we're going to talk first just about sex. So if you are a female person, we assume, have a clitoris, ovaries, breasts, uterus, XX chromosomes, and more estrogen, contrasted with male characteristics: penis, testicles, more body hair, muscular, XY chromosomes, testosterone. I just made these up. Surely there are others. These characteristics here are different from the gender characteristics that we use to identify people as men or women. These, for the most part, you can't see or you wouldn't necessarily know. These, for the most part, are to do with behaviors. And so again, we're saying there's 2. So women tend to be intuitive. They can wear dresses, wear makeup, softer, domestic, maternal. Women cross their legs often. Men are rational, wear ties, have shorter hair, are stronger, live in a public domain, tend to be wage earners, take up more space. Obviously, these are all generalizations, and that's going to be part of her point. Sexuality is desire, which of these kinds of people you desire. So we, right now, are going to match up female and woman, male and man, and talk about desire. Judith Butler talks about this, all these squares, as the heterosexual matrix. And she divides it into, if I can do this, andro, which is male man, gyno, which is female woman, and then on this side also, if you're an andro identifying person who is attracted to andro identified people, then you're gay. I've done that just with a male symbol, I don't know why. And then the same is true if you're lesbian, gyno to gyno. If you do it right, then you get heterosexual in those 2 categories. Okay. Butler is going to start undoing these categories and showing how they're socially constructed. All right, so let's start with this one. It's probably, so far as we know, true that many of these things describe your body or someone else's body, but it's not necessarily true. For example, unless you've had a full body scan and a full workup, You don't know whether your ovaries are functioning. You don't know what your hormone level is like or what your chromosomes are. Same over here. You probably don't know what your chromosomes are, or depending on like whether your testicles are functioning, maybe they're undescended, what your hormone level is. But the best argument for making these two categories non-binary, which this is another way of saying we're taking something structural and applying post-structural strategies to it, is to look at intersexed people. There are a lot of different ways to be intersexed. You might have a penis with a separate urethra. You might have undescended testicles. You might appear to have a vagina, but it doesn't go up to a uterus. You might have an enlarged clitoris that looks, at least when you're born, like a smaller penis. You might have XY chromosomes. Your hormones might not match up perfectly. I've forgotten what it's called, but you might have a specific gene that prevents the development of testosterone. So you end up developing with more female presenting breasts, for example, when the testosterone doesn't shut that down. And all of these versions of intersexed people make us question the binary between female and male. Okay. Gender is obviously a lot more fluid. It's easier for us to talk about that. Men can be intuitive, men can wear dresses, men can wear makeup, men can be soft and domestic and maternal and cross their legs. Women can be all of the other things also. So it's not just that these are stereotypes, it's that they are stereotypes, but they're also extremely easy to cross or undo. Butler's point is that we tend to think of them as real anyway, and she actually starts with sexuality and desire. She wants to point out in the heterosexual matrix that even if you're gay or lesbian, you're still participating in this system that insists that there are male people and female people, or women and men. So that if you identify as lesbian or gay, you're not really undoing the box that's set up here. So you might be doing it, quote, right, or you might be doing it, quote, wrong, but whichever way you're doing it, you're still operating in these boxes. That's the heterosexual matrix, and she finds this really troubling. And she finds it troubling in a way that makes her want to go back and trouble gender and go back and trouble sex. Okay, now I'm talking about the actual essay, and the essay is really difficult. So I'm going to walk through just a few points that she talks about, and then we'll go through the whole essay again in class. So just take from it what you can. The first part I'm going to draw your attention to is on the bottom right-hand side of 1030. She writes, identity categories tend to be instruments of regulatory regimes, whether as the normalizing categories of oppressive structures, by which she means that if you fit into one of those lists or categories or boxes, you are being repressed socially, or as the rallying points for a liberatory contestation of that very oppression, by which she means that sometimes it's really useful to identify as a woman if you're fighting for women's rights, or as a lesbian if you're fighting for lesbians' rights, and that those categories can be repressive, but that doesn't make them useless. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is on page 1033. And it's at the top left-hand side. She says, and is it not something like heterosexuality or bisexuality? This is disavowed by the category. Hang on. But a set of identificatory and practical crossings between these categories that renders the discreteness of each equally suspect. Is it not possible to maintain and pursue heterosexual identifications and aims within homosexual practice, and homosexual identification and aims within heterosexual practices? And what she means here is, in part, by heterosexuality, two different sexes. So desire, but also that there are males and females. And what she wants to point out is that you can be gay or be lesbian and still find this heterosexual matrix, still find yourself in this heterosexual matrix. Okay. At the bottom of that page, she writes, the bottom of 1033, on the left-hand side, is it not possible that lesbian sexuality is a process that reinscribes the power domain that it resists, that it is constituted in part from the very heterosexual matrix that it seeks to displace, and that its specificity is to be established not outside or beyond that reinscription or reiteration, but in the very modality and effects of that reinscription, by which she means that to be a lesbian is to stay within that matrix. She does end up saying that there are other ways of being, so we don't have to agree with her totally. We just need to understand what she's saying here. On the top right-hand side of 1033, she says, again, but to turn the homophobic construction on the bad copy against the framework that privileges heterosexuality as origin, and then she goes on. And what she means here is really interesting. She talks about how we tend to see homosexuality as a bad copy of heterosexuality. So if I still had my matrix here, you would, in fact, let me get my matrix because it actually makes this easier to understand, I think. So if you identify here and your desire takes you here, you're just doing a bad job of getting all the way over here. And if you identify here and your desire takes you all the way here, you're doing a bad job of stopping right here. She would say that being gay or being lesbian suggests that you're just doing a bad job of being heterosexual here. It's a bad copy. She's gonna say soon that it's not a copy at all, and that everyone is just pretending to be heterosexual or homosexual, and that there's no thing to be a copy of. Pretending is the wrong word. Performing as is the right word, which is why she gets in her next section to being in drag. And here's where I want to talk a lot about that video and what it means to be in drag and to perform as. Okay, so on the being of gayness as necessary drag, she writes, the professionalization of gayness requires a certain performance and production of a self, which is the constituted effect of a discourse that nevertheless claims to represent that self as a prior truth. When I do lesbianism, I'm suggesting that there is something about me that exists before I'm a lesbian, that there's like me, and then there's something I do that's lesbian. and she means doing it. Okay. On the left-hand side of 1034, let me see where the, okay. On the left-hand side of 234, there it is, she writes, rather, it is through the repeated play of this sexuality, notice the word play, that the I is insistently reconstituted as a lesbian I. Paradoxically, it is precisely the repetition of that play that establishes as well the instability of the very category that it constitutes. And this is really important. She's saying that as a lesbian, but then she's going to go on, she also means as a person, my acting like a woman or acting like a man or like a lesbian or like a gay person or like a straight person is the very thing that being a woman or being gay is. That it's not part of your personhood and it's not something that gets added on, that it's something that you do or something that you perform. So in the video, we see a performance of someone, we see someone performing man, someone performing man, performing woman, and then maybe performing man again. And gender there is doubly performative or triply so. And I want to talk about that in class as an example of this. Okay, so back to Butler. It's the repetition which makes it seem true. I act like woman all the time. And it's the repetition of that action that makes the action seem true. Lesbians act like lesbians or perform lesbianism all the time, which makes it seem like part of that person's identity. This is a way of saying that we're all in drag because we're all performing. It's not something that's just true of me. It's something that I do all the time. And the fact that I have to do it all the time makes us realize that it's not actually real. If it were real, it wouldn't matter whether I acted a certain way or expressed desire toward a certain kind of person. It would just be something true of me. But the fact that I have to do it or act like it or pretend it, or in her words, perform it, shows that it's a performance. Okay, so skipping to 1035 at the bottom right-hand side. I'm skipping the first couple of sentences in that paragraph. She was told that what I am is a copy, an imitation, a derivative example, a shadow of the real. Compulsory heterosexuality sets itself up as the original, the true, the authentic. The norm that determines the real implies that being lesbian is always a kind of miming, a vain effort to participate in the phantasmatic plenitude of naturalized heterosexuality, and that effort will always and only fail. Okay. By heterosexuality, she means, again, sometimes just two sexes. Here she means desire as well. And another way of thinking about this that I'll talk about in class more, and this goes throughout 1035 and 1036, is that there's no girl zero or woman zero or marker by which we're all judged. There's no person who's like a woman and we're all trying to be like her, but that we do it and our doing it is what it actually is. It's not like we're a bad copy of some woman called Jennifer who lives in Wisconsin who is the woman. it's the thing that we are doing or performing that constitutes woman. It's the performance. It's acting like. So all the things under gender, if I flipped all those, then I would be performing man instead of performing woman, which I would be free to do. Okay. And then lastly, is it lastly? Let me just double check. Yes. On 1041, which is the last page, on the left-hand side, that paragraph near the top, if gender is drag, and if it is an imitation that regularly produces the ideal it attempts to approximate, then gender is a performance that produces the illusion of an inner sex or essence or psychic gender core. The performance produces the illusion that there's something real there. It produces on the skin, through the gesture, the move, the gait, that array of corporeal theatrics understood as gender presentation, the illusion of an inner depth. In effect, one way that gender gets naturalized is through being constructed as an inner psychic or physical necessity, that gender seems real because we link it back to sex. And she's saying that that link is not necessary. And then we might point out that that these things don't have to be binaries either. And yet it is always a surface sign, a signification on and with the public body that produces this illusion of an inner depth. It's our performance that makes it seem like it's true. Makes it seem like it's true of me, not just that I perform womanhood, but that I am a woman, which puts me directly in that heterosexual matrix or in that list of gender categories. Necessity or essence that is somehow magically, causally expressed. And then at the very end, she says, she's talking about drag. The real as nothing other than the effects of drag, whose subversive possibilities ought to be played and replayed to make the sex of gender into a site of insistent political play. Notice all of the plays, right? That's, we know, post-structuralist. Perhaps this will be a matter of working sexuality against identity, even against gender, and of letting that which cannot fully appear in any performance persist in its disruptive promise. How can we, she's asking, disrupt these categories that seem real, that are only things we do? Okay, again, we'll go through it in class. It's really a very powerful argument if we can understand it, which I'm sure we'll make some effort toward doing. Okay.